Welcome to episode 265 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak encouragement into the hearts of educators and get you informed and energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking about why I'm pulling some of my books out of print and redoing my book, Awakened. Visit truthforteachers.com to get an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. I first started the podcast back in 2015, and nearly 300 episodes later, I'm proud to say there is a wealth of helpful information available to you. But you don't have time to listen to 300 episodes. How do you know you didn't miss out on something great a while back? What if there's something you need to hear now that I haven't talked about in a while? Enter the new Truth for Teachers playlists. I've carefully curated the episodes I'm most proud of, and that I think will help you the most from our 7 years of podcasting. Choose from the Greatest Hits playlist, the Encouragement playlist, the Productivity playlist, and the Student Engagement playlist. Just go to truthforteachers.com/playlists and enter your email address to receive the one that you want. I'll send you a PDF with a description of each episode, a link to its blog post and transcript, and a link to the MP3 file for listening. It also shares some special bonuses and other related resources that I think you might like. I hope this helps you find the best of our Truth for Teachers podcast. Just go to truthforteachers.com/playlists. In today's episode, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my thinking around a project that I'm working on. Currently, I am in the final stages of prepping a second edition of my book, Awakened: Change Your Mindset to Transform Your Teaching. I'm planning to release it in November 2022, so that is next month if you're listening to this episode when it first comes out. And I wanted to give you an idea of what will be different in the second edition and why. I also wanted to give you a little insider knowledge into the publishing world and how I make decisions about my books. From a technical standpoint, the second edition of a book counts as a brand new book. It has a new ISBN number, it has new links and listings in online retailers, and so on. As a general principle in publishing, a book should only be released as a second edition if readers who already own the first edition would benefit from owning the second. In other words, it needs to be different enough from the first edition to have enough updated content and new ideas and so on to qualify as a separate book. And this is the first time I've ever attempted a second edition of a book. It's been a really enjoyable process, as you'll hear me share. I'm also creating an audiobook version, which I'm really excited about because there wasn't one for the first edition. Audiobooks, unfortunately, are extremely time-intensive, labor-intensive, and cost-intensive to produce, much more so than the written edition of books. And they are also the least profitable due to the percentage that Audible takes and the pricing structure that Audible uses. I only make a couple dollars off of each audiobook sold. But I'm still really happy to be releasing the audiobook version of Awakened. It's something that I've always known I wanted to do because I think the book really lends itself well to that format. Awakened is a little bit more dense in places than some of my other books. So, for example, in places where I'm talking about cognitive distortions, I want to be able to use my voice, my expression, my tone to help you parse the information and connect to it. And of course, I am reading the audiobook myself, if that wasn't obvious, because so many of you are used to my voice from the podcast that I think it would feel weird to hear someone else reading it, both for you and for me. So I'm definitely doing it all myself. There's also a lot of places in Awakened where I give example scripts of healthy self-talk and language that you can use to reframe your thinking. And hearing those scripts in my voice, spoken over you and into you, I think can be really powerful. So I'm glad to be able to offer the audiobook as an option. I published a total of 5 books so far, so technically this second edition of Awaken counts as book number 6. I started my own publishing company back in 2008. It's called Due Season Press and Educational Services. This is technically the parent company for my business, so 40-hour Truth for Teachers everything is under the umbrella of Due Season Press and Educational Services. Anytime I do speaking or keynotes or professional development, that's the company I do business as, and it covers both publishing and PD. hence the press and educational services in the name. So that's just a little bit of a background. Basically, I'm in charge of making all of these decisions because I own the publishing company. So it's up to me to decide when something needs to be taken out of print or updated, when to release something new, and so on. So I'm going to let you hear an excerpt from the audiobook version of The Awakened Second Edition that talks about choices I've made around updating books and removing books from print. One thing that you won't hear in the audiobook that I want to mention here is that I will be removing from print the devotional companion to the first edition of Awakened. That's for a number of reasons, but the most practical and primary one is that I've shifted the content of Awakened around so much and written so much of it. I've renamed chapters, I've reordered things, that the devotional would only align with Awakened's first edition. They just wouldn't match up anymore. So the devotional will be out of print soon, but it's currently free to read via Kindle Unlimited. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can get the ebook version of the devotional if you want it. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes for those who are interested. It's designed for Christian teachers. If you're not sure, if you're not a Christian and you don't know, if you're not familiar with that terminology about devotional, that's what I'm referring to here. So that will be out of print soon, currently free to read via Kindle Unlimited. What you're about to hear is the preface to the second edition of Awakened, in which I explain what's changed and why. The toughest part of writing a book, at least in my experience, is the finality of it all. When my thinking changes about something that I explore in a blog article or podcast episode or social media post, I can add an update or disclaimer. I can change it, delete it, or post a follow-up. But a book? That requires me to be really, really sure about an idea and my explanation of it before putting it out into the world. Printed copies of the first edition of this book are forever and still remain in tens of thousands of homes and classrooms all over the world. And yet, if I wait to publish until I'm absolutely certain that I know everything there is to know about a topic, and I'm 100% sure that the information will never change, then obviously I'd never write any books. Some works age better than others, but there's just no way to write a book on teaching or mindset that won't eventually become dated. Though I think many readers haven't considered it this way, every book is ultimately a snapshot in time. It captures the author's research and understanding within the context of their learning so far, and that learning continues every day that we're alive. Everything we create is a product of our time, our lived experiences, and our understandings. All the authors I know regret some of the things they put into print. Some wish they could change their wording in a certain spot, or add or remove specific examples. Once you've released your ideas into the world, you no longer have control over them, and people will apply your ideas in ways that you never imagined, both positively and negatively. So when you have a long legacy of work, and I certainly do because I started blogging back in 2003, there will eventually come a time where you either put your head in the sand and you ignore all your old cringy stuff, or you deal with it. In 2021, I decided to take my first book out of print. It was called The Cornerstone, Classroom Management that Makes Teaching More Effective, Efficient, and Enjoyable. I had published it back in 2009. And frankly, I don't want teachers buying classroom management advice that's well over a decade old. Also, there were a couple of chapters that I think now are kind of problematic and reinforce negative stereotypes. When I pulled The Cornerstone, I'd already taken the most relevant parts of that book and developed the 40-hour Teacher Workweek program. This is an online, self-paced course with downloadable resources, printables, audio resources, and more. 40 Hour has been available since 2015, and I have a team of educators who check for outdated links and add more current resources every year. We also did a major overhaul to the entire program in 2020 to reflect pandemic and post-pandemic teaching, as well as user feedback about how I might better organize and format the materials. I'm much more comfortable with creating online courses like 40 Hour because I can add new things as education changes and as I grow both personally and professionally. So that was my solution for the book, The Cornerstone. But with this book, Awakened, a second edition, felt like the best way to update my ideas. I wanted to create an update which reflects not only how the world has changed over the past 11 years since I've written the book, but how I've changed as a person. Looking back now in 2022 at the version of Awakened that I first published in 2011, I can see 3 distinct phases in the path toward becoming who I am currently. The first phase was driven largely by my understanding of the Bible and my Christian upbringing. The second phase was driven by cognitive behavioral therapy and neuroscience. Over the past few years, I've entered a new phase of personal development that's fueled by a more holistic mind-body approach. I've also explored how many of the problems we attribute to our own personal faults are actually coping mechanisms or learned behaviors. Our mental health is not developed in a bubble and is greatly impacted by societal expectations, as well as systemic and institutional structures. Through all of these stages of my personal development, as I learned about each of these things, I can see many common threads, and I think you'll notice them as you read this second edition. This time around, the book is even more centered on non-attachment to expectations and outcomes, along with non-judgment toward yourself and others. You'll find a heavy emphasis on letting go instead of trying harder, of unpacking behaviors and thought processes and releasing the ones that aren't serving you well. The goal is to be the observer of your thoughts and choose the perspectives that align to your values and how you want to feel. This includes building an awareness of our biases, including prejudice and stereotypes, but also confirmation bias, recency bias, and other things our brains do to help us stay alive, but create all kinds of distorted, inaccurate thought patterns. Radical acceptance is another running theme in the book. That means accepting what is so that you can work to make peace with, adapt to, or create needed change from a place of clear-headed insight. There are some parts of teaching and life right now which cultivating a neutral emotional experience is probably the best-case scenario, and I share many healthy reframing strategies that don't aim for a positive outlook. These were all principles in the first edition of the book that I've developed much more fully in the second. So what's been removed? Well, I've taken out references to religion and spiritual practices that some folks found distracting, and also that no longer reflect my own beliefs. These mentions were intended to be inclusive, but had the opposite effect in some cases, and prevented me from encouraging public schools to utilize the book with their teachers. I've also removed or edited paragraphs that could be perceived as toxic positivity. I've been super careful not to imply that if you're unhappy in teaching, it's your own fault, and if you can just think differently about your circumstances, everything will be great. You'll see more acknowledgments about the need for systemic change and tips for how to advocate for better working conditions without burning out. But perhaps the biggest change in the second edition of Awakened is an acknowledgement of the mind-body connection, which, frankly, I didn't understand at all when I wrote the first edition. I heavily reworked multiple sections of the book to address listening to our bodies and intuition, and responding when feelings arise not from thoughts, but from trauma that's stored in the body. While I'm not an expert on these realities yet, it felt important to acknowledge them and guide you toward other resources where you can learn more. One of the best parts of the creating of the second edition has been seeing my own growth as a writer. I think you'll find that the second edition flows better, has more natural and less stilted language, and explains concepts more clearly. At least I hope so. I've had almost 12 additional years of regular writing and publishing experience since I wrote the first version of Awakened, and it's been really rewarding to see how my voice as a writer has evolved. I rewrote this book in large part for myself. I wanted to once again feel comfortable having this book exist in the world with my name on it. But more so, of course, this book was written for you. Teaching has not become an easier profession over the last decade. As I write this, we are in our third school year that's been impacted by the pandemic, which has created a roller coaster of unpredictable, uncertain, and unstable teaching and learning conditions. We're seeing a greater number of teachers resign, retire, and walk out than ever before in my lifetime. Changing the way you think cannot fix all the problems in education. But for those teachers who have decided to stay, or want to stay, or need to stay, your mindset is an aspect of your work that you have a great deal of control over. Your mindset is worth attending to so that you can live the best life available to you and show up as the best version of yourself for your students. I kept the title and subtitle of the book the same because I do still think of mindset work as an awakening. Each new aha moment and realization about what's working in my thought patterns and what's not working brings me to a greater level of contentment and peace. Awakened is still a fitting title because I want you to experience those moments of new insights and possibilities too. And even though so many other things are different now than those 10 plus years ago, I do still believe that changing your mindset can transform your teaching. And more than that, it can transform the entire way you live your life and bring you into better alignment with who you really are. Thanks for taking this journey with me, whether it's for the first time now or a decade after the first time you read this book. This second edition is a snapshot of where I'm at right now, and I can only hope to have the kind of life experiences and personal growth that would lead me to write a third edition in another 10 years. This process of transforming our minds to live in full integrity and authenticity never ends, and I'm glad you're here with me on the path. Thanks for listening to this audiobook excerpt from the second edition of Awakened, Change Your Mindset to Transform Your Teaching. Starting in November 2022, you'll find it available for order on Audible, the Kindle ebook version on Amazon, and the paperback version wherever books are sold. Thanks for supporting me and my work.